Hello, my name is Tony Simmons, and it's my honor to greet you from Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. I am the executive director and help create the Teacher-Powered, Learner-Powered, Family-Powered, and Community-Powered High School for Recording Arts. High School for Recording Arts is a public charter school founded over 20 years ago by a young African-American man who saw a need in his community and wanted to do something about it. David TCL has used his knowledge of and connection to community to create a school with a group of young men who showed up to his recording studio every day to engage with him in the music business, and who, like him, had been pushed and kicked out of school because of how they looked and showed up. Knowing that these young people were hungry for knowledge and to be heard and seen through their creative expressions, and that they had a right to an education and to be in school, he created the High School for Recording Arts with these young people and a great community. At HSRA, we believe that each young person comes through our doors with abilities that deserve to be recognized and honored. We believe that all our young people, as we all, need holistic supports that allow them to reach their full potential. We believe that to properly engage with our learners and support them reaching their potential, they need access and exposure to innovative learning spaces and practices, such as what we have here with our learners providing the production to capture this keynote. Last, we must do all of this with a social justice lens. That means to us that we must take note of what is happening in our communities and listen to the stories of our students and their families, and apply all of that to drive the work we do on behalf of our young people. We stand on all of their shoulders. Right now, I am literally standing at the borderline between the two great upper Mississippi cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. Minneapolis that way, St. Paul and HSRA that way. Just below me, the mighty Mississippi roars south to the Gulf Delta with all of its beauty, majesty, and history. That history speaks metaphorically to the very times we are in. The Mississippi itself was named by the indigenous people whose land I stand on, the Ojibwe. They called this river Mississippi, which means great river. The Mississippi has played a major part of our country's history, from being the westernmost border of a nascent nation that was founded ostensibly on the principles of freedom and equal justice for all, to later becoming the launch point to what became known as Manifest Destiny, which led to the subjugation, slaughter, and near genocide of our native brothers and sisters. We also know that this river brought both great material wealth to this nation as a literal stream of commerce that enabled waves of cotton and tobacco to travel from the south to the merchants of the north for further distribution and white wealth accumulation. As we know, that commerce was produced by the brutally enforced slave labor of African people. Yes, this great river carries, in the words of the famous Irish healer Pádraig Ó Tuama, nationalistic pride for what this river has contributed to this nation's great material success, while at the same time being the backdrop of its original sin of racism and white supremacy. Throughout history, this river has borne witness to our struggle with this complex history. Yet despite our struggle, as we see behind me, the great river keeps rolling along. In light of this complex history, we must take note of both space and power. The space that I currently occupy and have been referencing, the space that we respectively and collectively occupy. For all of our spaces absolutely intersect with power. Again, Pádraig Ó Tuama speaks to this point when he notes how a recognition of the power and politics of place is vital. So when we think of both place and power, the question becomes, where is the place we're considering? Who occupies it? Who controls it? Who is seen and not seen? And tragically, far too often, who lives freely or who is far more likely to die on it at the unjust hands of some despotic force. With that, it is meaningful at this point to mention that just a few miles from this great river, George Floyd was senselessly murdered by a police officer. And if you allow me to digress for just a moment from my main points, to give a deeply personal belief inspired from the book of Amos, which beautifully states, "But let justice run down like a river, and righteousness like a mighty stream." If that passage is truly prophetic, then through those words and with proximity to this great river, I am confident that we will ultimately see justice for good brother George Floyd. That cry for justice that began on the nondescript South Minneapolis street corner of Chicago and 38th Street has now been shouted all over the world. During the early protest hours, I witnessed many of my students, and yes, some of my young educators and teachers, out with bullhorns, fists raised, and their hearts pounding to be seen, heard, and felt. Those protests have been largely driven by young people along streets, plazas, parks, highways, and in various communities across America. As an education leader, and you may have been asking yourself this too, I was specifically confronted with questions about space and power from all that I was witnessing. My questions were, what do I make of this moment in time? Why are they choosing to protest at these particular places in this or other manners? What are they actually fighting against or for? Are there raised fists shouting for more than just justice for George Floyd and against police violence? Or is there a larger cause that this moment is about? What is being validated or challenged in all of my assumptions about my work? What is the true purpose of education and the facilitation of learning? Who am I actually doing this for, and what are the real outcomes that I seek? Is it just to check the traditional boxes of success as educators that the system tells us matter most, like test scores? Who am I doing this work with? Who is at the table with me making decisions, designing our school programs or new schools, or even a first project for a beginning independent learner? Who isn't at that table? And as of this group of people in the streets who aren't my young people, but also crying out for justice, who are they? Who are these community activists, faith leaders, gang interrupters, artists, community elders, local business owners, mothers and fathers that perhaps I never took adequate time to see or acknowledge before? But there they are in the streets, fists raised, crying for justice. Imagine for just a moment that instead of the protest being directed most specifically at the police, it was directed at our public education system. Would any of us be shocked or wonder why? When over 5 million young people, mostly black, brown, and poor, are pushed or kicked out of school at any given time in this country, could we blame the crowd for directing their grievances at us? When primarily black and brown and Native students are treated as suspects just for manifesting outbursts from deep trauma and mental distress, like they did with the brother Daniel Prude in the streets of Rochester, New York. And instead of a community wrapping its loving arms around that young person, they have the police summoned. Should we be surprised when instances like that happen every day in our schools and communities cause people to become outraged at our racist educational system and society? And if you're uncomfortable with me or anyone else calling our educational system or society racist, then let's stop instituting and maintaining racist policies that lead to racist outcomes. Like, for example, the policy that we have here in Minneapolis-St. Paul, which causes teachers of color to be the last ones hired and first ones fired, even though they are wholly underrepresented within our education system, despite a growing number of students of color. This policy of last hired, first fired is making for naught any meaningful diversity efforts, thus denying the growth of teachers of color who intuitively have the cultural competencies to make a difference in the success of students of color. That practice is systemically racist and leads to a racist outcome and needs to change now. Because of issues like these and many others, I feel like marching the streets every day on behalf of our young people, those who have been the most marginalized and oppressed in society, who are seen within the education system as defective products that are either felt sorry for or in need of fixing, instead of someone taking the time to learn about each of them on a deep level to find and nurture the peculiar bent of genius that each possess. That is most often found when education is made to amuse and intrigue, as it does in so many privileged schools. I want to march against the education system that chooses to ignore the pain our babies and young people bring with them to school each day, from broken communities that were once vibrant until they were destroyed by bulldozers for new highways, destroyed by planned and systematic economic disenfranchisement practices, leading to a lack of affordable housing, homelessness, gentrification, and destroyed by the allowing of illegal drugs and guns, which then turns their once honored communities to militarized, police-occupied territories. We can no longer ignore that pain or why it exists. We must also stop ignoring the strong and beautiful families our learners come from, the struggles that they have endured, the resilient and resourceful people who make up their communities, along with all their ancestral knowledge. All should be welcomed at the school door. All should have a seat at the table. School is our place as teachers and educators. It is their place too as learners, their families, and community. That collectively is our power. Yes, as leaders of Teacher-Powered schools, I commend you, all of you, for all that you do. Your organization has chosen a word, power, that speaks directly to the times that we are in. And I learned growing up that if you're going to talk big, you better be ready to bring it. So with that, I conclude with a return to an acknowledgement of the times that we are in and what I believe it means. See, there was a powerful moment in one of Dr. King's speeches when he was describing all that was happening at that moment in time in the late 1960s. And he said with great rectitude, quote, "One thing we must see today is that these are revolutionary times," unquote. My fellow educators, either you see it or you refusing to look, but these too are revolutionary times. Now, I don't believe in violence or destruction or that all revolutions have to be violent. But when we talk about place and power in an aspirational quest for people and community power, and yes, teacher power, you must be prepared to fight. Fight as Dr. King, John Lewis, Rosa Parks, and my students who fought by raising their voices in the streets while strategizing on the sides. For, as the renowned abolitionist Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. So when I state we are in revolutionary times, yes, I do mean to fight, by fighting the powers that be and anyone who stands in the way of our young people's rightful place within our educational system, in the way of their hopes and dreams. Whether that fight is against an old and entrenched educational bureaucracy determined to sustain a broken system that was never designed for the ultimate liberation and success of the young people I serve, or if it's fighting an overall political system that seeks to disenfranchise them from their civil, economic, and especially now, right to vote. So Teacher-Powered school leaders, if you mean what you say, let's borrow that fight, courage, passion, and purpose of the young people we have seen in the streets fighting for justice. Let's fight for the often marginalized people who dwell within their communities and pledge to fight just as hard and powerfully for them. What are we ultimately fighting for? We're fighting for the dignity of every young person who walks through our doors or clicks on their Zoom link. The families they come from, the community and heritage they represent with all of its traditions and customs that may have greatly contributed to our society and been the source of their survival and resilience. We are in a very real sense fighting for our relevancy. For if we continue to ignore our people and the places they come from, we will no longer matter to them at all. And in that spirit of maintaining relevancy and recognizing collective power, I wish to share this space with two people who personify the power of our mission as educators to a far greater extent than me, who embody the best hope for our future that matches the steadiness and continuing rolling of the mighty waters of the Mississippi. One is a brilliant teacher and another an equally brilliant student. Both, I can say proudly, from my school. I pass to them to share their stories and message to you.
Hello, my name is Haben Ghebregergish. I'm a math educator here in the Twin Cities. Currently, I serve students in St. Paul and Minneapolis as a lead facilitator at the High School for Recording Arts. I was born in Eritrea, a small country in East Africa, and immigrated to the United States at 5 years old, along with my parents and my younger brother. My parents grew up during a violent civil war. Their educational pursuits were cut short, but they had greater hopes for their children. We came to the United States for economic opportunities and political freedom. That was our American dream, and it started right here in Minnesota. I went to public schools in St. Paul from kindergarten to middle school. As a child of immigrants, I learned how to do a lot of things at an early age in order to help my parents. I completed government forms, I helped them study for their citizenship tests, and I translated during phone calls to ask the cable company why they keep raising our bills. I ultimately graduated from Egan High School and then received my Bachelor of Arts degree from the illustrious University of Chicago, becoming the first person in my family to graduate from college. Now, I educate some of the Twin Cities' brightest and most talented youth. No matter where you teach, geography matters because community matters. Before your students walk or log into your classroom, they have been somewhere else. They have had dynamic experiences that are extremely specific to where they live. They have learned from wise and interesting people in their community. They have done awe-inspiring things that were born out of opportunities in their neighborhoods. Outside of mastering the content in your course, they are mastering other skills close to their hearts, such as poetry, engineering, music, or the art of civil disobedience and change-making. As teachers, we must understand that our students are learning new things every day without us. I'm here at the memorial of our brother, George Floyd. This site represents the active learning that all of our students had this summer, whether they saw George's murder on social media or refused to be a witness, whether they actively protested to ensure that the police responsible were held accountable or watched it on Facebook Live, whether they saw images of burned buildings on their phone or out of the window of their homes. All of our students learned this summer. After talking to my students about the killing of George Floyd and the civil unrest that followed, I know that they were and are still deeply affected. But this tragedy and miscarriage of justice touched young people from all parts of Minnesota, all parts of the United States, and all parts of the world. This is an extraordinary moment in time where students in Marshall, Minnesota, Los Angeles, California, Brooklyn, New York, Accra, Ghana, Sao Paulo, Brazil, and Kingston, Jamaica, all have something very powerful in common. As a teacher, this summer should make you wonder what your purpose is as an educator, what your duty is, and what you are offering to your students that will be relevant and empowering to them at this moment and in the future. The answer, I believe, starts by recognizing and honoring the experiences that students have outside of the four walls of a classroom. The first reason for this is because students need to know that you care about them. They do not expect you to know everything, but they do want to know that you will listen. So listening is where culturally relevant pedagogy begins. One of the first questions I ask a new student is, what are you passionate and curious about? Sometimes I can't get a straight answer to that question because the trust isn't there yet. But I can ask, where are you from? How was it like growing up there? What do you like to do for fun? How was your summer? How was your day? These questions are not time fillers or Unit Zero activities. They are essential to how you can effectively design your courses so that they serve your students. That is the second reason to recognize and honor students' experiences. They make you a more effective teacher. The murder of George Floyd created a very clear need to ask these types of questions. Young people needed and wanted a space to process, to heal, and to plan next steps. Frankly, many schools missed the opportunity. After the murder of George Floyd, the High School for Recording Arts hosted a series of youth-led virtual conversations. Dozens of students attended to share their experiences, speak their truths, support one another, and debate about legitimate and illegitimate responses to police brutality and systemic racism. This meaningful and deeply contextual learning opportunity demonstrates how we can redefine education so that it is more relevant for students and for teachers. In classrooms at the High School for Recording Arts, students' experiences, passions, and learning styles determine what and how we learn. The students have the opportunity to make the level of choices that almost mirror what an executive team for a small company might make. They help shape learning targets and how we get there. They help determine what success looks like through rubrics and self-assessments. This way completely undoes the traditional student-teacher power dynamic. And it is necessary because in order for education to be relevant to students, students should be at the table from the beginning, not after the pacing guide, the standards, and the lesson plans have already been written. It is imperative because we must end the myth that only the teacher owns the knowledge. When it comes to the creation and execution of policies surrounding issues like policing and economic development, we have started to go back to the question of who was at the table. Educators who want to be part of the fight for social justice should ask themselves the same question in their field. In these unprecedented times, teachers cannot be what many would call neutral. As educational philosopher Paulo Freire once said, washing one's hands of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless means to side with the powerful, not to be neutral. It is time to be bold. Teachers cannot be afraid of being too political because, frankly, everything is political. In these times, neutrality is a myth, pure and simple. Teachers must be willing to make spaces for students to discuss issues of power and inequity. This is not to say that they should produce the knowledge for the students and make conclusions for them, but rather that they should give students the space to synthesize their research, to answer the questions on their own. As a teacher, having power means being able to create a climate of innovation and self-determination. It is about building the capacity of our young people to solve the problems that they have inherited from previous generations. Racism, the widening wealth gap, climate change, and so much more. We have learned this year that they have the will and the energy to take on these challenges. But there is this theory that it takes 10,000 hours of deliberate practice to become an expert at something. The average young person spends close to 20,000 hours in school, between kindergarten and 12th grade. If every classroom from K through 12 becomes a place for this practice, our students will be experts at problem solving well before they graduate. And teachers, that is your power.
Hey y'all, I'm Walter Cortina, a 17-year-old senior at High School for Recording Arts. I'm an executive intern at the Minneapolis Foundation and project director of Minnesota Young Champions. I want to start by sharing a bit about myself and why I do the work that I do. I grew up around a lot of different cultures. I was raised in the housing projects in South Minneapolis called Little Earth. My parents were somewhat involved in the street life, so I was around all types of cultures. I learned more about my fellow Latinos, the African American community, and the Asian American community, and the Native American community. I learned about the challenges they faced and why a lot of the communities and cultures were the way that they were and still are to this day. I learned about the Native American genocide and how they were separated from their families, just as Latinx families are facing now in present day. I learned about the slavery that African Americans went through. All this was very eye-opening and interesting because these experiences were not reflected in the textbooks that I was reading. At this young age, I developed a passion for breaking cycles of oppression and fighting for what is right. I am here at the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden near the Walker Arts Center. In a year that has brought much chaos to our lives, for me this site represents peace and tranquility. Through the summer, Minnesotans have been coming here to be with loved ones and enjoy the scenery. This place reminds me that at the end of the day, we are all just humans. It reminds me that no matter what, life is beautiful and that there are brighter days ahead. For my freshman year of high school, I attended a very traditional school in Minneapolis. It was very unique and a special experience. I was the only student of color in most of my classes, and I was pushed away from other students and even teachers. All the students knew the teachers pretty well because they got along with the families. I really just felt like an outsider, and the people in the environment didn't help much. Either I was going through some personal things at home, and it felt like the school really didn't care, even though I would communicate this at times. I really didn't like that experience, so I ended up moving back to my old school, Venture Academy. There they were really big on whole child needs, so when I moved back, they helped me with a lot of the issues that I was having outside of school. Having a school that really cares about their students on a deeper level really makes a difference in how a student learns. So I was doing much better academically when I moved back to my previous school. At Venture, me and other students decided we wanted to have a voice in how our school operated, and we developed ideas for making the school even better for its students. For example, we suggested that mentorship and project-based learning should be an aspect that is included in students' education. We eventually formed a team called the Young Changemakers, where we worked with the school to help make some of these proposals come to life. We had meetings with the teachers and principal. We even had a chance to present to the board of directors. They were really interested in what we had to say, and for the following year I wanted to work much closer with the team of student leaders. The whole journey was really a learning experience. Many of the students on the team, including myself, never really had a voice when it came to how we were being educated. Many students shared that was actually their first time they had any say in what they were being taught. Many students learned how it was to take leadership and have meetings. The team learned how to overcome barriers when it came to working with a party that may not agree with you all the time. I moved to high school for recording arts for my 11th grade year. And let me tell y'all, this school is the best school that I have ever been to. They're so big on whole child needs and in all areas, from their education to the mental health of their students. The school has a very unique setup, and it really helps students like me who don't really fit with the traditional school system. For example, the relationships with teachers are one of the best. We, the students, are able to call teachers by their first names. We are able to have real conversations with our teachers and joke around and whatnot. This makes the school really feel more comfortable and not much like a job. Another big part of the school is the personalized learning plan that they offer students. This means that we're able to create your own schedule for times that best fit for you. You don't have to be in class all 8 hours. The school understands all students may not be able to do that, or may not be so beneficial for them. The school just whole around really cares about students, and it's such a great place. Having a student voice at such a young age really made a difference for me. It led me to be more involved in community activities and groups. It even helped me lead a team of young champions who are focused on making sure high school students are getting unemployment benefits, because currently high school students are the only age group workers who don't get these benefits, and it's simply because they are enrolled in high school. We have formed a powerful coalition of high schoolers, lawyers, and nonprofit organizations to make a change. We successfully gained the support of politicians by lobbying and testifying. We have done this by collecting stories for affected high school students and staying resilient. Now we are working with a legal team to sue the state of Minnesota. This is our fight. The Minnesota Young Champions are also helping to ensure more young adults are registered to vote in the state of Minnesota. And all this work that I am doing for my community is helping me get much closer to my graduation, because I am earning credit along the way. The High School for Recording Arts understands that some of the most meaningful learning can happen outside of the classroom. Having a voice really matters, and any chance a young person can have one, we should push them towards it. Administration and teachers should help elevate the voice of young people by encouraging them to speak on issues inside and outside of the school. Thank you all.